dead. And no one told me. I walked past his office and his assistant was bawling. "What is it, Felicia?" "Oh, haven't you heard? Mr. Tyndall's dead." What I heard was, Mr. Tyndall hurt his head. I thought, for God's sakes, pull yourself together. "Where is he, Felicia?" That was a reckless thing to ask. Matthew Tyndall and I had been lovers for 13 years, but he was my secret, and I was his. In real life, I avoided his assistant. Now her lipstick was smeared and her mouth folded like an ugly sock. "Where is he?" she sobbed. What an awful, awful question. I did not understand. I asked again. "Catherine, he is dead," and thus set herself off into a second fit of bawling. I marched into his office as if to prove her wrong. This was not the sort of thing one did. My secret darling was a big deal. The head curator of medals. There was a photo of the two boys on the desk. His silly, soft tweed hat was lying on the shelf. I snatched it. I don't know why. Of course she saw me steal it. I no longer cared. I fled down the Phillips stairs into the main floor. On that April afternoon in the Georgian halls of the Swinburne Museum, amongst the 1,000 daily visitors, the 80 employees, there was not one single soul who had any idea of what had just happened. Everything looked the same as usual. It was impossible Matthew was not there, waiting to surprise me. He was very distinctive, my lovely. There was a vertical frown mark just to the left of his big, high nose. His hair was thick. His mouth was large, soft, and always tender. Of course, he was married. Of course. Of course. He was 40 when I first noticed him, and it was 7 years before we became lovers. I was by then just under 30 and still something of a freak. That is, the first female horologist the museum had ever seen. 13 years, my whole life. It was a beautiful world we lived in all that time. SW1, the Swinburne Museum, one of London's almost secret treasure houses. It had a considerable horological department, a world-famous collections of clocks and watches, automata and other wind-up engines. If you had been there on April 22nd, 2010, you may have seen me. The oddly elegant tall woman with the tweed hat scrunched up in her hand. I may have looked mad, but perhaps I was not so different from my colleagues. Various curators and conservators pounding through the public galleries on their way to a meeting, or a studio, or a storeroom where they will interrogate an ancient object, a sword, a quilt, or perhaps an Islamic water clock. We were museum people, scholars, priests, repairers, sandpaperers, scientists, plumbers, mechanics, train spotters, really, with narrow specialties in metals and glass and textiles and ceramics. We were of all sorts, we insisted, even while we were secretly confident that the stereotypes held true. A horologist, for example, could never be a young woman with good legs, but a slightly nerdy man of less than 5'6", cautious, a little strange, fine blonde hair, and some difficulty in looking you in the eye. You might see him scurrying like a mouse through the ground floor galleries with his ever-present jangling keys, looking as if he is the keeper of the mysteries. In fact, no one in the Swinburne knew any more than a part of the labyrinth. We had reduced our territories to rat runs. The routes we knew would always take us to where we wanted to go. This made it an extraordinarily easy place to live a secret life and to enjoy the perverse pleasures that such a life can give. In death, it was a total horror. That is, the same, but brighter, more in focus. Everything was both crisper and further away. How had he died? How could he die? I rushed back to my studio and Googled Matthew Tyndall, but there was no news of any accident. However, my inbox had an email which lifted my heart until I realized He had sent it at 4 p.m. the day before. I kiss your toes. I marked it unread. There was no one I dare turn to. I thought, I will work. It was what I had always done in crisis. It was what clocks were good for, their intricacy, their peculiar puzzles. I sat at the bench in the workroom trying to resolve an exceedingly whimsical 18th century French clock. My tools lay on a soft grey chamois. 20 minutes previously I had liked this French clock, but now it seemed vain and preening. I had buried my nose in Matthew's hat. Snuffle, we would have said. I snuffle you. I snuffle your neck. I could have gone to Sandra, the line manager. She was always a very kind woman, but I could not bear anyone, not even Sandra, handling my private business, putting it out on the table and pushing it around like so many broken necklace beads. Hello, Sandra. What happened to Mr. Tyndall, do you know? My German grandfather and my very English father were clockmakers. Nothing too spectacular. First Clerkenwell, then the city, then Clerkenwell again. Mostly good, solid English 5-wheel clocks. But it was an item of faith for me, even as a little girl, that this was a very soothing, satisfying occupation. For years I thought clockmaking must still any turmoil in one's breast. I was so confident of my opinion, so completely wrong. The tea lady provided her depressive offering. I observed the anti-clockwise motion of the slightly curdled milk. Just waiting for him, I suppose. So when the hand did touch me, my whole body came unstitched. It felt like Matthew, but Matthew was dead, and in his place was Eric Croft, the head curator of horology. I began to howl and could not stop. He was the worst possible witness in the world. Crafty was, to put it very crudely, the master of all that ticked and talked. He was a scholar, a historian, a connoisseur. I, in comparison, was a well-educated mechanic. Crofty was famous for his scholarly work on sing-songs, by which is meant those perfect imperial misunderstandings of Oriental culture we so successfully exported to China in the 18th century, highly elaborate music boxes encased in the most fanciful compositions of exotic beasts and buildings, often placed on elaborate stands. That's what it was like for members of our caste. We built our teetering lives on this sort of thing. The beasts moved their eyes, ears, and tails. Pagodas rose and fell. Jeweled stars spun, and revolving glass rods provided a very credible impression of water. I bawled, and now I was the one whose mouth became a sock puppet. Like a large chairman of a rugger club who has a chihuahua as a pet, Eric did not at all resemble his sing-sings, which one might expect to be the passion of a slim, fastidious homosexual. He had a sort of hetero, gung-ho quality medals people are expected to have. No, he cried, hush. Hush? He was not rough with me, but he got his big arm around my shoulder and compelled me into a fumes cupboard and then turned on the extractor fan, which roared like 20 hair dryers all at once. I thought, I have let the cat out of the bag. No. He said, don't. The cupboard was awfully small, built solely so that one conservator might clean an ancient object with toxic solvent. He was stroking my shoulder as if I were a horse. We will look after you, he said. In the midst of bawling, I finally understood that Crofty knew my secret. Go home for now, he said quietly. I thought, I've betrayed us. I thought, Matthew will be pissed off. Meet me at the Greasy Spoon, he said. 10 o'clock tomorrow, across the road from the annex. Do you think you can manage that? Do you mind? Yes, I said, thinking, so that's it. They're going to kick me out of the main museum. They're going to lock me in the annex. I had spilled the beans. Good. He beamed. and the creases around his mouth gave him a rather cat-like appearance. He turned off the extractor fan, and suddenly I could smell his aftershave. "First, we'll get you sick leave. We'll get through this together. I've got something for you to sort out," he said, "a really lovely object." That's how people talk at the Swinburne. They say object instead of clock. I thought, he is exiling me, burying me. The annex was situated behind Olympia, where my grief might be as private as my love. So he was being kind to me. Strange, macho, crofty. I kissed him on his rough sandalwood-smelling cheek. We both looked at each other with astonishment, and then I fled, out onto the humid street, pounding down towards the Albert Hall with Matthew's lovely, silly hat crushed inside my hand.